Ja, ik sta hier in Finland backstage bij TopGear Live Helsinki. Het is een klein vermogen aan supercars. Ik ben net even een blokje om geweest met Paul Swift, de precision driver. En eerder op de dag sprak ik met een van de 3 presentatoren van TopGear, James May. In April, TopGear Live, it will return to Amsterdam. In 2010, you were the replacement of the guy that replaced you. You were your own stand-in. How do you remember that night?
I was there very briefly. I flew out. I already knew my part in the show because we'd rehearsed it anyway. I flew out, did it, broke my toe in the supermarket trolley of death, had a couple of drinks, and then I think we formed a new religion, and then I went home again.
Okay, now we're here in Helsinki, where you guys are doing the show for your Finnish fans. You always adapt your show to the country that you're visiting. Is Finland very different from Holland?
Yes, it is, because the thing we find interesting about Finland is that it's a very reserved country, or at least that's what we believe so far. So
Finns don't talk a lot, do they?
No, they don't make much noise, and when they really, really like something, they go, well done. You know, or if you ask them a very interesting question, they go, maybe. Whereas the Dutch, I think, despite what somebody said earlier on, I think the Dutch are more like the British, a bit more noisy and, you know, a bit more flighty, we'd say. So, yes, Finland is different.
Now, in 2009, former Formula 1 champion Mika Häkkinen taught you some skills on the gravel roads. Then you drove, you got to Veyron over 400 kilometers an hour. Those things he taught you, did they come in handy when you drove that Veyron, or was it something completely different?
Well, it's completely different, and the thing, I've said this many times before, that the thing about the Veyron is it would be very easy to big it up and say, yes, it's extremely difficult, I got to 429 or 27 or whatever it was, but actually it's quite easy, because it's a straight line, and you just, you know, as long as you don't go like that suddenly. The Veyron is a purpose-built supercar that was designed to be the fastest car in the world and to show off how stable they could make it at those sort of speeds and how reliable. So when you get in it and you press the pedal, you're just pressing the pedal on the massive VW research and development department, and it's perfectly safe and very easy. It's an automatic, for God's sake. You know, you don't even have to change gear if you don't want to. Just press the pedal, hold the wheel straight, and look for the little message to come up in the window that says "Bing bong, top speed." That's it.
Now, in April, you're coming over to Amsterdam, and I think you'll be surprised by the amount of Opel Amperas that are driving around there.
I like electric cars. I like driving a car powered by an electric motor. I acknowledge there are lots of problems still with batteries or whether or not we could ever make the hydrogen infrastructure work. But my view is that with all new things, and it was the same with video recorders, it was once true of cameras, it was once true of nylon underpants, you need people rather than testers and researchers. You need people, members of the general public, to get hold of a new idea and do the first bit of real world testing. And there's a lot of people that say, oh, the electric car is just a statement made by very wealthy people who can afford to do it. And that is true, but at the same time we need those people to do that, because that will force the development, and then it will become more accessible for everybody else. And don't forget, that was true of the car itself once. When the car was a new idea, they were owned by very rich people who could devote a lot of time and money to running it, trying it out, seeing if it worked. And then when they did, the price gradually came down, the Model T became a third of its original price, more people could have them, and the idea took off. So it has to happen the way it does.
When Clarkson, Hammond and yourself get to choose a cheap car for some challenge or the other, I think you always end up with the coolest cars. Do you have a weak spot for cult cars, for the automotive underdogs?
Well, I have a soft spot for underdogs in general, because that's all part of being British, you see. We like an underdog. We are one these days. The thing I like most about Top Gear is when we buy old cars or you know, we have a budget for a car. We've just done it in Africa as well. And it becomes very interesting because with not a very large amount of money, if you had, say, 1,500 euros, there are a huge number of cars you can buy for that these days, and a lot of them are really perfectly good and perfectly usable.
Just a bit of a gamble.
It's a bit of a gamble, but that's quite exciting, I think.
back to the underdogs. How do you feel about the loss of Saab?
Well, yeah, we were very sad about that because I've owned a Saab in the past, and when you look at their history dispassionately, they did do a lot of stupid things. In the early days, they really were an aircraft manufacturer. I know they weren't fairly soon after, but they sort of went into car making not really knowing about cars. They went into car making because they needed something to do, because the demand for aeroplanes fell off. And it threw up some very interesting ideas, but one or two things about Saabs were great. I liked the ignition key that locked the gear lever. I think that's a much better idea than locking the steering wheel.
It's better for your knees.
It's better for your knees, yeah, and it's a nicer place to have the key. I liked the clamshell bonnet thing they did. I liked a lot of the styling things they did. I liked what they did with turbocharging and the way they championed it and so on. So I think it is sad that they've gone. I mean, towards the end, Saab became a bit of a sort of pastiche of itself. It became a branding exercise for General Motors and so on. But it's still sad when a great name like that disappears, because you think, well, what might they have done next that now will never happen?
Well, what they're going to do next is to build electrical cars, supposedly. Now, Victor Muller, its former owner, still manages to keep Spyker alive, and in the meantime he's suing General Motors for $3 billion. What do you think about Spyker?
Well, I've only driven one Spyker. I remember writing in a newspaper a few years back when it was first mooted that Spyker would buy Saab, and I was saying, do we want a group of slightly mad people who build cars with pleated leather and extravagant switchgear that cost a lot of money and look outrageous? Do we really want those sort of people taking control of an established, respectable marque like Saab? Yes, we do, because that's interesting. You know, they don't come to it with any baggage or preconceptions. I think it's great, and General Motors have got $3 billion spare, I'm sure. So yeah, good luck to him.
Okay, now in April you will do TopGear live shows in Amsterdam, 5 of them. What can we expect to see?
There is a series of games loosely inspired by the Olympics that we think could be done better or as well in cars. So there's sort of racing stunts, there's some display things, we build some chariots, we play curling with cars, we play polo with motorcycles. And there will also be the Stig, there will be various displays, there will be people going upside down, some fire and some explosions. And tickets are still available and are very reasonably priced.
Okay, last question, because I just want to know. If you could pick an era we could time warp you into as a 20-year-old boy, what era would that be? The 20s, the 30s, the 60s, the 70s?
To be honest, I think it would be now. I would love to be 20 now, because I've always maintained that the past is not as good as we thought it was, or as we think it is, because we filter out all the rubbish. We forget that it was dirty and full of disease and nothing worked and there were no computers and, you know, cars were terrible. So I think living in the age we're in now, with the sort of communications you've got and the power of the internet and social media, and being 20 years old and full of life and sexual urges, would be just tremendous. It was so difficult when I was 20, which was in the early 80s. I'd love to be able to transport myself to now at that age. It would just be tremendous.
And what car would you buy now as a 20-year-old boy?
With a 20-year-old's money?
No, with carte blanche, unlimited money.
Oh, a Ferrari 458. I think it's the best car in the world.